Hello everyone, welcome to another one of the Foil Guys how-to videos where we are going to be doing an anatomically correct heart. Now obviously just the heart shape is not what we have in mind here. We'll be doing veins and arteries and ventricles and all the other creepy things. What it mainly is going to look like is, again, not a 100% accurate model. The goal of this is going to be appearances rather than perhaps a study on organs. So if you're doing this for a project, then note there'll be a little bit of fine-tuning. This is meant to look proper from one angle. But I will be showing you the techniques that you'll be using, just like in any of the other how-to videos, and how to handle foil and get these details down right. Again, if it doesn't come out the way that you think it ought to right off the bat, practice makes permanent. Make sure that you get it right and that you are, of course, using these techniques in 3 very simple ways. So starting, of course, with the fundamental basics, what I want you to do is to take a piece of foil, any size, and then tear it into 3 sections. There are multiple techniques that people are going to be using in regards to sculpting with aluminum foil. I prefer to be as frugal as possible, so in attaching sections, the goals will be to attach without glue, cut without scissors, and, of course, sculpt without crushing them, making a 2-dimensional shape into a 3D shape. And that's going to, of course, require self-control, light hands. So cutting without scissors is fairly easy, just being able to take each individual piece and tearing it in a straight line. Let your thumbs guide it. If you'd like to fold the piece of foil in a particular direction as a guiding line, it'd be the same as doing that, but we want to manage all of our pieces. So three individual pieces, not that difficult. But moving on to not just cutting with scissors, but attaching without glue. And this is going to be very important for attaching all the various details like the veins, like the arteries, like the main piece, which is going to be that sac of muscle. When you are attaching 2 separate pieces of aluminum foil, what you need to remember is to pinch and crush. And it's going to have some crossover with a lot of the other techniques. But when you have 2 separate pieces, the idea is when you place them in overlap towards each other, you are pinching both pieces together and allowing them to stick. Now, if I'm too aggressive, they might detach, so just flatten them out, pinch again, and keep rolling it until you have a connected piece. The last technique will be regarding the turning of 2D shapes into 3D shapes, and that, of course, will involve a bit of self-control. Anyone can turn a 2D shape into another 2D shape. What we want to do is turn something 2-dimensional, flat, into 3-dimensional, and that is knowing when to stop when squeezing. And the best way to treat this is, again, like a piece of Play-Doh, with aluminum foil being able to hold the weight. Have that line in what you're willing to crush and simply stop, just like you would in encapsulating a section of air in your hands. The same thing that you're going to be doing with the foil is to turn something 2-dimensional into something 3-dimensional. This will, of course, then involve wrapping it to give it a little bit of reinforcement, but it's going to be using these same techniques. So 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, cutting without scissors, and attaching without glue. If you can do that, you can do everything else that is going to be involved in making an anatomical heart. I'll be using these pieces since we like to recycle. Now, when it comes to other finer details, most of these things will be somewhat bulky, but there's also going to be a 4th technique I'd encourage regarding the veins and the finer details, and that's going to involve pinching and twisting. Now, the best way to approach this is to find yourself a pencil or a pen and get used to, just like with the molding shape, moving around your fingers around the point and having your fingers used to that sensation when you're working with a 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional piece. And just like with the 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, instead of cupping your hands, you're cupping your fingers, if you will. Just rolling it around the same way that you would those pieces. And then when the veins are coming out like little tree branches, that will be the same mentality when you're attaching them without glue. Now, as you probably saw in the original video sculpting this, we of course made it so that it would look properly from one angle, and in the same way that's going to be the goal of this. But with these pieces, we of course want this to look as large as possible so that we can work around some of the finer details. If you do it small, you're going to have a lot more fine tuning to do. You might need instruments, and we want to get used to working with our hands. So with this, we'll make the heart as large as possible, and that will require some layers. So just take your three-dimensional piece, the ones that you use for practice, and wrap them like you would a Christmas present or a rock. Just like when we were talking about 3D shapes, it's with open hands rather than closed hands. That's going to be the first step, just a lump. To give it more reinforcement, we're going to do it again. Notice what I'm doing is not crushing it, but wrapping around it. I'm respecting the pieces that I have already set in place and making room around them. Since I want this mentally to be the size of the heart, and knowing that the bottom of the heart has more of a dipped shape, I'm going to use my fingers first to hold this in place so that I don't crush it, and these fingers to smooth it out just like I did with the molding shape. But instead of cupping my hands, I'm cupping my fingers. There it looks like the bottom of a heart. One more reinforcement, and then we'll start attaching the arteries. Now it's going to look like a dispenser of frosting, perhaps, or a fish, now that I look at it. So this is what the basic sac of the heart is going to look like. This we're going to use as one of the primary veins that's going to surround it. There are others, but for the sake of the simplicity of this sculpture, we'll only settle for one. There are around 5 branches that we're going to do, so we'll tear off another long piece. Cut without scissors. Tear that into individual pieces. Around the same size and length that I want. Now, these veins are going to have other branches, so I'm going to roll them like we talked about with the pencil. Do a stick, but not all the way. I'm going to also cut with scissors on the other end and do the same thing. And make just a bunch of tree branches. Maybe an early one here. Later one here. Second vein, third, two nice large ones, maybe with some fingers on the end of them. This is just pinching, the same motion that you would working around the tip of a pencil. Practice with it and get used to it, and also knowing when to start and when to stop. Give yourself as much room on the bottom as well, because you will be attaching without glue these individual tree branches to the main vein in a moment. Last one. All right, now that we have all the individual pieces of our vein, this will be essentially repeating and wrapping around something just like you would, say, attaching pieces of twine, wire, or straw. We've made the pieces of wire, so we're just going to attach without glue once again, but instead of flat pieces, We're doing pre-made pieces. You can twist them around, spin them around, pinch them together, whichever you would prefer, but they will stick when you've molded them into one whole piece. Do that on another end, twisting them around just like you would, say, a Christmas tree ornament, arts and crafts projects and such. Notice I'm being very gentle where I need to be and very firm in the areas I want to be stable. I don't crush them. I keep my hands away from them as much as possible. Just like spinning these things around a piece of twine, I've created the pieces, now I'm attaching them without glue. If they don't stay on for you, then there is no shame in getting glue to attach the pieces, but note it won't be just as efficient or rewarding if you can do it with only aluminum foil and these hands. That will be our vein. Now, as per a reference, this will be surrounding. So notice, just like with the wrapping around, I'm taking another piece that we've sculpted, putting it on top and molding it onto the edge with a mind for this by which it will be attached. I'm going to take another piece of foil, wrap it around, and pinch it into the sculpture just like I did the individual veins. That'll suffice. I'm pressing down on the piece that I want the veins to all be attached to and molding around that. As you can see, it's still moving around. So what I'm going to do is find behind the piece where I need to pinch it and mold it in. Continuing to mold also the excess veins to the bottom of the muscle. We've made progress. Now for the main arteries. These will essentially be using your fingers as an outline, wrapping around them in order to make tubes. Just like with the individual sticks and artificial wire, we're going to make individual tubes by using our finger as a mold around it and pinching, molding the same way. For the sake of this heart, we'll do 3. Three pieces. Now, take your finger, wrap the foil around it, mold it, and now reinforce it. When you get more used to working with these, you can perhaps just have one part of your finger in and learn to be gentle with the outlines. But if you need to keep your finger or different fingers or maybe a pencil as guidance, same thing you would use to practice, mold around it and give it that kind of shape, like you were wrapping your fingers and giving yourself larger fingers. Then what I want you to do is bend it the way that you want these arteries to be bending. That way the open valve retains its shape and the tubing is headed the direction that you want it to, depending on where you desire these to be on your heart. Second one, same deal. Wrap around your finger. Reinforce it. You can use separate pieces of foil for this as well. I'm going to pinch in the little side so that looks better. And there we have some arteries, ventricles, whichever. Now, to attach these to the heart, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the veins, wrapping around and pinching in the details that I want. I'm going to place them on where I think they should go. This one will perhaps arch over. This one will be on the side. And this one will be coming out the same place that I pinched the vein to. Now this is where I need to do a little bit of mental preparation and planning, because I'm going to wrap around it once again, but I don't want to cover over what I've sculpted. So as I'm wrapping over, I'm going to move them out of the way to make room for or around the arteries that I've also sculpted. Pinching onto this artery. Notice how I have the tube areas out. Moving those back in place, wrapping around them, pinching them, and molding them. Same thing that we were doing from the beginning. Now, moving these as I see fit to look like the kind of heart I would expect it to be. There's now going to be smaller tubes that I can attach to these areas. So what I'm going to do is, with the planning that I had from the beginning, tear this into individual pieces, but without removing them from the main sculpture. If you happen to lose a little piece here and there, that's fine, just as long as you keep the main form of the sculpture. It's all going to depend on your ability to attach them later on with the folding and pinching technique. Do the same thing you did with these, like with the veins, but slightly thicker. And already attached to the sculpture. Now, if you want these to be conic, you can cut them off and maybe use a straw as guidance. I prefer to use my hands. I'll just flatten them. For the sake of time. I'm going to move these, however, the picture of the heart I wish it to look like is going to. Now this looks a little long to me, and I also note that in pictures of hearts there are wrappings, I'm not sure what the biological term is for it, as well as another sac over here. So I'm going to use this second piece to once again wrap around and make individual details and sculptures onto my sculpture. Pinching on the area I want them to stay, leaving that open, holding this out firmly, moving this in gently, pinching and molding to where I want it to stay. Moving the veins back as needed. Now, this is just going to be a sac with little tubes on the side, so I'm just going to mold it in, stopping, of course, where I need to. This, however, is going to be more of a flat coral-like piece. So I'm going to fold it over, and on the edges, just like we did here, make little fingers. Just like with molding, and fold it in. See that? This needs little tubings on the side. So I'm going to mold around it, just like I molded around this, pinching on the edges to keep it firm, and making little fingers, but longer ones, on the side. As you can see, it's not quite stable yet, so I'm going to give it more reinforcement once I have all the little pieces taken care of. More pinching here and there as we go. It doesn't have to be finished until it's finished. This obviously is still a little skinny, so I'm going to give it more weight by moving up the veins while still attached, and around the sculpture, giving it more depth. I mold firmly the part that I want to keep the shape on, but loosely around the back, because that's the part I want to look wider. Fold this back down. And there we have an anatomically correct heart. continue to practice. Let me know what you guys need further clarification or have questions on, other things you'd like to see made in more detail, and I'll look forward to the next time we can do these videos together. See you next time.